A deputy opens the door at the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station and tells Mitrice Richardson she's free to go. It's after midnight. She has no phone in her hand, no purse on her shoulder, no car keys in her pocket. The only vehicle she arrived in has already been towed away. She is 24 years old, miles from home, and the people who just watched her pace and speak in fragments inside a holding cell are now watching her step out alone. Mitrice wasn't a stranger to planning or to people. She had graduated from California State University, Fullerton, with a degree in psychology, and she was building the kind of young adult life that looks steady from the outside. Work, friends, family, a future that still felt open. That's what makes the night she vanished so jarring. It begins in public, in a restaurant full of witnesses, and ends in a landscape where nothing speaks back. On the evening of September 16, 2009, Mitrice drove from the South Los Angeles area to Malibu and pulled into the parking lot at Jeffrey's, a restaurant perched above the Pacific Coast Highway. Staff and diners noticed her acting strangely, approaching strangers, making off-kilter remarks, seeming unfocused and unusually bold. The longer she stayed, the more the room watched her. When the check came, she couldn't pay the bill, about $89. Employees called the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Deputies arrived and questioned her. They would later say she wasn't drunk or high, and that she didn't appear intoxicated on a field sobriety test. But they also decided something was wrong enough to intervene. She was arrested on suspicion of not paying for the meal, and deputies also found a small amount of marijuana. Her phone, wallet, and purse were secured inside her car. The car was then towed away, leaving her belongings locked behind glass at an impound lot along the coast. Mitrice was booked at the station up in the hills, a place that, to most people, is nothing more than a building at the end of a long drive. Inside the station, her behavior continued to worry the people who loved her. Her mother, Lettice Sutton, learned what had happened and called, asking officers not to release her daughter alone. Lettice said she was concerned about Mitrice's mental state and begged them to hold her until daylight so family could pick her up. Station personnel told her Mitrice would not be released until later in the morning. Lettice went to sleep holding on to that promise, thinking she had bought her daughter time. Instead, in the early minutes of September 17th, at about 12:28 a.m., Mitrice was released. A sheriff's spokesman would later insist she showed no signs of mental illness or intoxication and was fine, and that she had been invited to wait inside the lobby, but declined. Whatever the reasoning inside the building, the outcome outside was stark. Mitrice walked out without her belongings and without her car, stranded far from home with no way to call for help. What happens next begins with footsteps. The Malibu hills and the canyon roads are not designed for pedestrians. There are stretches where a person can walk and hear nothing but distant traffic and their own breathing. At some point after leaving the station, Mitrice moved down into the Monte Nido area, a small community tucked among ridges and brush where properties back up to wild terrain. Just after dawn, around 6:30 a.m., a homeowner in Monte Nido, former KTLA news anchor Bill Smith, looked out and saw a young woman in his backyard. Mitrice was there, sitting or lying down as if she'd run out of energy. When he asked if she was okay, she told him she was resting. He called the sheriff's department. Deputies responded and made contact. Then, after that moment, after the call, after the approach, after the chance to anchor her in place, Mitrice was gone again, slipping out of view the way someone can vanish in a community threaded with brush, creeks, and narrow trails. By the time Lettice learned her daughter had been released hours earlier, the fear hardened into rage. The questions were immediate and brutal. Why tow the car if release was possible? Why keep her phone and wallet in a vehicle she couldn't access? Why not transport her to a safer location, or require a responsible pickup, or simply keep her until morning? And if deputies truly believed she was okay, why did they acknowledge she could wait in the lobby at all? The days that followed turned into a grinding routine of flyers, phone calls, and searching. Mitrice's face spread across news reports and online posts. Tips came in, some promising, some vague, some cruel. There were reported sightings, including leads that sent family and investigators chasing the possibility that she had made it far from Malibu, but every trail collapsed into uncertainty. Her disappearance drew national attention, and the intensity of that attention made the silence feel even louder. A young woman had last been seen in official custody. Then she had been seen again in a backyard at dawn, and then she was simply gone. Months passed. On January 9th, 2010, the Sheriff's Department conducted one of its largest searches, bringing in trained teams and hundreds of volunteers to sweep miles of canyon terrain. They worked ridgelines and trails, scanned creeks and culverts, and pushed through brush that tears at clothing and skin. Still, they found nothing that answered the only question that mattered. Summer arrived with no resolution, and then, nearly a year after Mitrice walked out of that station, the canyon finally gave up what it had been holding. On August 9th, 2010, park rangers discovered human remains in a remote area of Malibu Canyon, known as Dark Canyon, not far from Monte Nido and roughly 6.5 miles from the sheriff's station. The remains were skeletal and partially mummified. Mitrice was identified as the victim. The details only widened the mystery. She was found nude. Items of clothing, her belt, bra, and jeans, were located down the ravine, separated from where her remains lay. The terrain was steep and unforgiving, the kind where one misstep can become a fall that never stops cleanly. Investigators said there were no signs that clearly proved homicide, and the Los Angeles County coroner ultimately listed the cause of death as undetermined. Reports that the body was handled in ways the family believed compromised evidence only deepened the distrust, because once a scene is disturbed, the smallest answers can be erased forever. For her family, undetermined felt like a door slammed shut. They believed she never should have been released the way she was, and they believed the investigation left too much unanswered. Lawsuits followed. In 2011, Los Angeles County reached a settlement with Mitrice's parents for $900,000, split evenly. The payment acknowledged something went wrong, but it didn't explain the hours between midnight and dawn, or the last choices Mitrice made while alone in the canyons. Years later, the case was reviewed again. The California Attorney General's office conducted an investigation into the circumstances surrounding her release, and, in early 2017, concluded there was insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against anyone involved. The result was official closure without personal closure, a conclusion on paper that still didn't tell a mother and father how their daughter went from a restaurant parking lot to a ravine. Mitrice Richardson's name remains tied to that night because the story is not only about a disappearance, it's about decisions made in minutes that can shape the rest of a life. A release time, a tow order, a phone locked in a car, a young woman walking away from fluorescent lights into an empty stretch of road, and the long silence that followed. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.